Thanks, Anna. Sounds like my audio is okay, so that's good. I was concerned I wouldn't be able to ask Campbell vexing problems.
Vexing.
He doesn't look like he gets vexed very easily, actually. He looks mostly unvexable.
It's a good claim. We'll see.
Yeah. And so, just setting this up, Campbell, just to let you know, you can, if you want to present at any time, just say so. There is a present button at the bottom of the Google Meet, and it will share your screen, and I'll give you priority window, and you can go for it. So there's obviously the three of us. We know each other particularly reasonably well, I would imagine. Although I haven't had the honour of a good old long run with you yet, Campbell. But perhaps we will do that one day in Victoria or fields further away.
I like the sound of an adventure. That'd be great.
Yeah. So I think perhaps just an introduction, Campbell, to let everyone know who you are and probably what you specialise in, what you have to offer the world, and how perhaps we can help people tonight.
Great. Well, yeah. Thanks for having me along. I am quite obsessed with strength training for trail and ultra runners in particular. I can talk about it on many a long run, even with the same training partner. So they often put the earbuds in after, well, as long as they can tolerate. So I'm pretty obsessed with strength training. I love trails. I love being outdoors in the elements, particularly running, also, surfing and just about anything to do with the outdoors. I've been delivering Run Strong workshops to the running community for quite a few years. I think you guys came to the very first one, but that was probably about 4 years ago now, if I can remember correctly. But I did a series of them throughout Victoria, so quite a few in Melbourne and Geelong. I went up to the northeast to Bright. I went to Gippsland, but enjoyed travelling Victoria, trying to send a good message of strength training to keep people enjoying their training as best as possible and turning up to events, preferably without aches and pains and niggles along the way. So I try to keep, and I've got a little fan in the background whose new word is Dada, and she will probably frequent this conversation. So
yes, brilliant,
some good background noise.
Brilliant. It always astounds me that women are able to engineer a very complicated human body over the course of about 9 odd months. But if I roll my ankle, I'm going to be in pain for 2 years. So I can't quite fathom how that works. But more power those women and the miracle of stem cells, eh?
It's incredible what women are capable of and what will undo a man very quickly. So, I can relate to that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Now you're right. We did come and watch you in Melbourne, I think, one of your courses, and Ellie and I sat up the back with a few of our athletes, and I was really impressed with the presentation. I don't know whether I've told you, but I just love the way that you presented the information. You came from a knowledge base that, the information you were sharing was obviously backed in peer-reviewed science, but you told it in an engaging way. And I remember thinking, leaving from that, how much you had to offer for other athletes and how much they could learn from you, and really just hoping that you could continue to spread that message. So, it was from the back of that you and I have had some discussions now, and maybe you've even managed to get me in the gym doing a little bit of work as well. So
good to hear. Well, look, the science is it can be somewhat complicated, but it all boils down to quite a simple message. So I'm always happy to have a look at the science, and that's what I try and follow as best as possible. But I also realize that people are time poor, especially if they're training for long distance events. They've got family commitments, and there's always work and other things that get in the way as well. So trying to balance out what the research suggests and then what is the reality of what people can achieve, because if people they might have the greatest program, but if they're not going to do it, then they won't get any benefit at all. So trying to thread that fine line between the two. I do get pretty caught up in the science. I really enjoy it. I think that there's a lot to it. And there's just ways we can probably get a little bit more out of what people are doing as well, as opposed to having to reinvent everything. It's nothing is necessarily new. It's more just making sure that people can make some changes to what they're doing, and then they'll know that it's benefiting them and they can stick with it, as opposed to kind of giving up, not knowing if it's the right thing for them or if they should be doing something else.
Yeah, great. So I think probably one of the things I'd like to do before I, hand over to you entirely is probably do the last bit first. So whilst we have everyone's attention, can you perhaps briefly introduce what Run Strong is? How an app works, and how athletes might be able to get some information to use the Physi app to get some strength training from you, and then how that might look for them in terms of cost and delivery. So we can get into the why it all matters in a minute, but whilst we've got their attention, let's do the last bit first.
Yeah, great. So my website is runstrong.co. Very simple. So I'm moving more towards a subscription model, which is what people seem to enjoy, just because you can, if you like, purchase a single program, and that would last for 3 months' time. If people always want an extension, of course, that's fine. If life is busy, I understand. But I think after about 3 months duration, people are typically getting tired of a program. And if you're getting bored, then your body's getting bored, and we start to lose those benefits. But the subscription model means you have 6 months access, and you get your own code that you can then download any program at any time. And the codes, we use a software called Physi app, which it's Scandinavian software. It's really cool. There's exercise videos. If they don't have an exercise, then I will go and film it myself. So then instead of having some great Nordic voices, they will have my own voiceover over the top. But we have a whole range of different exercises, and they're specific to different events. So if you're doing, probably the main ones to consider would be things like UTA, having a lot of stairs, and stairs are different and have different needs than a long sandy run. We have Surf Coast Century this coming weekend. So you'd probably expect to be limited in different areas. So if you're running, Margaret River or Surf Coast, the sand can be your great undoing, and you may get cramps throughout your hammies, that kind of posterior chain. Whereas through UTA, you might think of your hip flexors that need to have strength through range, and those are considerations as part of the exercises. Or likewise in February in New Zealand, is it February, Tarawera? So you've got like maybe a flatter course. I don't want to say it's a flat course, but relatively. Yeah. You might be expected to maintain a higher pace over a hugely long distance, and that has some other challenges as well. So just some different ways that I tweak the programs to try to make them specific to the different events, which people always ask me, why would I get this program as opposed to that one? And likewise, if people don't necessarily have a specific race in mind, then I can modify, combine a few different programs just to make sure we're covering our bases. And then as they settle on something in the future, then we can start to work towards that as well. Yes. The other thing, so one more thing is people can make changes to programs whenever they want. So if they're doing UTA and it's too long, or they've seen another exercise someone else is doing, and that's a substitution, if I think it's appropriate and they want to do it, then it's easy. They just send me an email, and I swap exercises around, I shorten it, I lengthen it, I combine programs. So all that stuff is free as part of the subscription too.
Great. So what is the cost that you're looking at for this?
Yeah, the cost. So 6 months is $150, or each individual program is $75, and it's 50% off to all SQUADRUN people all the time. I think it always has been, as far as I can remember. Just because I know how passionate you guys are about your athletes and supporting their running needs. So I will happily support that.
Thanks. We definitely appreciate that. And I know that obviously a lot of our athletes have in previous years used it, and the feedback is always really positive. A lot of people love what you do and the contribution that you have made, I think, to the sport. Obviously, in many regards, quite, it's philanthropic almost. You have a business. You are a very busy person. It sounds like you're a dad too, so there's a lot there's a lot going on in your life. So it's really cool that you can do this and relatively inexpensively, given how much value it does add. And I'm sure you were about to explain the cost of being the ambulance at the top of the cliff is far less than being the ambulance at the bottom, and dealing with broken athletes is therapeutically trying to get triage athletes and get them back on the trails is an extensive process, when really it's avoidable with far fewer interventions.
And absolutely, and I've been there myself. I'm pretty much constantly there myself. I think just having an active lifestyle means that you're more susceptible to injuries, but there's certainly much better injuries to get than sitting on the couch and getting a sore neck. So I've had many an injury in my time, so it's something that I'm very conscious of, and it's what I do for my job as well. Being an exercise physiologist, I work in that field. But people train really hard to do these events. I've done events from the shorter ones, the fun runs that most people kind of start off with on the running journey, and then into half marathons and up to I've done a single miler. I'm not ruling out further milers. The training for it is so much fun. It really is. But the amount of training and preparation and everything else that goes into it, listening to all these different podcasts, trying to get all the information that you can, just so you're kind of mentally prepared for the day as well. But I know the effort that goes into it, and for that to come unstuck because of an annoying calf strain, they're not inevitable injuries. They do happen, but they don't have to be inevitable. I think a lot of people accept them as part of training. So if you can do something small throughout your week to keep those pesky injuries at bay, just so you can turn up at the start line feeling as best as you can, then I think everyone will certainly enjoy the day a lot better.
Yeah, it certainly is a massive time investment, preparing for these things. And you're right. It's so often, I think looking at the stats, Tarawera, for example, for the 100 miler, I think we had about 151 finishes last year. There were 70 athletes that either didn't make the start line or didn't finish. So you're in a situation where you have 2/3 finishes and 1/3 that, probably could have avoided an injury on their way into the event or succumb to injury, fatigue or similar during the event. So, you've got a 1 in 3 scenario that you won't see the finish line, and the numbers generally back that up for the really long stuff. And if you step back to say UTA, it's something like about 25% won't see the finish line as well. So that's for the 100K. So that these demons are out there, and any way that you can mitigate those risks to ensure success, invaluable. And this seems like it's so collaborative now to have the endurance training, the running that we want to do, as well as the strength training to support it. Were you interested in presenting, or what format would you like to follow tonight, Campbell?
Well, we had a few Q&As. I mean, is that something that I know that they were questions people were interested in hearing more about? So I'd be open to starting with them if that's appropriate, and then if there's other things that come up along the way, we can either answer them as we go, or I can go into the specifics around things like what I would expect around frequency and duration are probably 2 big ones. Programming, like sets and reps, weights. I can be as specific as we like. I could throw a couple of exercises. I can show them as well, like some sample programs. Because the presentation, it is quite sciencey. And it's one of those things where I had a mole in the audience, so that during my first one, just to make sure that he could give me some very honest feedback, and he was there. He had a printout of the slides, and he was just culling these ones along the way. So I've tried over time to reduce the detail, although I do get excited about it. Not everyone does, and I appreciate that. So I just want to make sure that people can get out of the session exactly what they would like to.
Well, I've got a list of questions that I've collated from our group. So should we start with that, and then you can expand on things as
perfect.
You see fit? Does that sound good, Kerry?
Yeah, perfect. We'll leave with some questions. Let's, as I said, let's try and vex him.
And likewise to the people that are watching, feel free to put your questions in the live feed chat. We can definitely ask Campbell them. So, yeah. So Campbell, I'm going to start with a nice, easy one. I'm a lazy runner. I just love running and being outside. Why should I do strength work?
Yep, people often apologize to me by saying I don't like gym. Like I represent gym, or maybe my name is Jim. I don't know. I don't understand. I once had a gym membership when I was about 18, and I had to pay to end my membership because it was that contractual memberships that they had back then, and I didn't go. That was the only time I've ever had a membership, and I probably, out of the however many months I paid for it, I would have been maybe 3 times. And I was studying exercise science at the time. I was interested in the field, and I had no interest in going to the gym. I'd much rather go for, a surf or a run or be outdoors. But I fully accept that if I can keep myself strong and moving well, then everything else is much more enjoyable. It's, if you miss out on a period of time when you were supposed to be doing a training block, and there's interruptions, you're better able to pick that up where you left off, as opposed to you do that and then something else comes unstuck because you've lost a little bit of conditioning. So it's really an investment to allow you to enjoy everything else you want to do. I have worked in one setting in particular, which was at the city bars. So we've got the clinic downstairs, and then upstairs is a public gym, and I'd always take people up to the gym to use those facilities. And I would see people regularly who would be walking on a treadmill. They might be looking at their phone, watching a movie, or even reading a book, sitting on a bike, and that was their thing. So in Melbourne CBD, it's a pretty green city. There are, if you're going for a walk or a bike ride, there's places you can go. You can be outdoors. There's some cool architecture. These are all things that I would do instead of being inside a gym, reading a book or looking at your phone. So I think I understand that it's not attractive to many people, but it will allow you to do everything else you'd like to do, and just have more of a buffer against injuries. And you can keep, off the couch with an ice pack on your ankle and be outdoors enjoying yourself.
I'm with you on that one. So what is the ideal amount of strength work per week?
I think most people probably aim for more than I would recommend. So what I recommend is twice a week.
Yeah.
And minimum would be about 20 minutes. I think if you're doing less than 20 minutes, you're probably just not quite covering your bases. And we want to make sure we can maintain muscle balance. Yeah. So, just doing squats might be quite good for your quads and your glutes, but then you're kind of neglecting your hammies and your calves. So we want to make sure that you don't just get super strong in a couple of muscle groups. We just want to be able to make sure everything's working as a team. So twice a week, I think, is a really good amount of time. If you're going through an off season or a period of time where you're just taking a bit of a step back from running and you have spare time, you can do a third session. I just don't find that it's sustainable for many people to be in the gym 3 times a week. I don't think many people can maintain that. And then also when you're going through a high volume phase, so building at the moment through, Tarawera, which is coming up quite soon, I expect people would be doing, pretty much the peak of their running.
Yeah.
I do a more undulating strength plan where you're, twice 1 week and then once the following week. And then that you've got a lighter strength week. You won't have as much fatigue in your legs. But it's something that is coming up. You've got one less session that week in the gym.
Yeah.
It takes a bit of pressure off people too.
So just to clarify, you're talking about 20 minutes total in the week. That's probably broken up by two by 10 minutes as the minimum, because you've got to cover quite a few muscles and quite a few interventions.
I'd be looking at 2 by 20 minutes. So in a single session, a minimum of about 20 minutes. So which would allow 3 or 4 sets of a couple of exercises.
Okay.
So, and that's taking it quite easy. So that's not rushing. You could certainly move faster.
So would you look at breaking it down into the primary muscles, the major running muscles? I mean, you could rattle off. There's probably 4 main drivers in the biomechanics, in the kinetics of movement. However, there's a lot of interconnected muscles that and many of them have a high workload duration. However, they're not considered major muscles in the driving chain of running.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd be, focusing heavily on quads and calves. So people often neglect, calves are calf muscles if you don't have a favorite muscle in the body and a pet name for them. But quads and calves are number one. Calf muscles, I don't think there's any excuse for losing strength in your calves. I think it's just a really simple exercise you can do. They can be quite time consuming. And if people are particularly time poor, then I'll look at using something like skipping as a warm-up, because it might not be heavy strength, but it certainly has a combination of impact of all the other things we look at. It's obviously very specific and functional, so we're getting your calves strong in a position where you need them to be strong. And then maybe in a couple of months' time, you might return to doing some very simple calf raises, preferably heavy, probably in a squat rack so you can get enough weight on your shoulders, or in a leg press machine if you're in the gym. So heavy calf strength. And quads as well, you're talking about, squats and single leg squats and step ups and variations of lunges. So those are the big two. And then you can't just have super strong quads without balancing that out with your hamstrings. And there's a bit of a ratio that we work towards, which is pretty simple. It's about, you need your hamstrings to be about 70% as strong as your quads. So it's nice to have some numbers that you can work towards. And then if you do drop into a gym and you want to test yourself, you can use the hamstring curl machine. You can test the hamstrings. You can do single leg if you want to, and then likewise knee extension. They're quite isolated machines, and you can test your quads. That's probably the more specific way to do it. We've got some tests on RunStrong as well that are freely accessible, where you can test your own, your quad strength with a single leg squat. Then you have other muscles like your glutes contributing too. So it's not as specific, but it does give you a bit of a ballpark. But we'd like your hammies to be at least 70% as strong as your quads. And then our glutes, not to be neglected. People probably do focus on them quite heavily, maybe more than they necessarily need to. They're an important muscle group, but biomechanically, they don't do as much with running as we might think that they do. An exception probably being UTA, because they're really going to help you get up those stairs. So, and the more you can shift the focus off those quads, then the better off you'll be over, 50 or 100 Ks or however far you're going. So we want the team to work together. And look, if you don't have strong glutes, then your biomechanics is going to fall apart. So they're pretty important for a range of other reasons, more so than just strength. And then the final group, which is kind of a supplementary muscle group, would be the core. So probably the one muscle group that people, I find, spend more time on than is necessary. They're tiny muscles. They're really helpful. They make you feel good, which is really important. They make you run tall, and after however many kilometers with mandatory kit on your back, your posture will be pretty rotten. So if you've got a nice strong core, you can at least stand upright and stand proud, stand tall, and run with the biomechanics you've trained with, because not many people train in that hurting position for much time. So we're normally pretty good at running with nice posture, but when your posture falls apart, then the wheels can fall off as well. So I don't program a lot of core, again, because they're small muscles. They fatigue quite quickly. You don't need to spend 15 minutes on core. You should be able to really target them in 5 minutes if you're doing it well, which is my approach. And I normally save that for the final part of the program and ask people just to set a timer on their phone for 5 minutes, and they challenge themselves to get as tight as they can in that period of time. And it's job done. If you're doing it well, then you don't need to spend a lot of time. So those are the big five. Well, there's really big two, second two, and then there's core.
That's cool. Thank you, Campbell. You did mention, so this was one question, so I thought I'll follow up on it. Where does plyometrics and functional strength training sit in training plans for endurance runners?
I would like to take the first question first, please. So,
okay.
Yeah. Well, Plyo, I love. I think that Plyo is something that you would be best to save for later in your strength training journey. I have these bonus programs that are called Phase X. So if people, I've got kind of Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3 for all events. And then just to make sure people can get the most out of their training, I try to program in some plyo when they get to phase 2. So they finish phase 1 and then they're ready. They do the testing again, the self-testing at home, simple exercises, see where they are, left versus right leg, make sure everything's heading in the right direction, jump into phase 2, continuing with heavy strength. And then we add in some plyo. So plyo is a really great way to convert strength into function, into dynamic energy. So I like strength to, for the most part, to be relatively slow, because a lot of the time we go through the motions with exercises in the same tempo, which is normally just kind of up and down and up and down. There's some exercises that I try to program, particularly our calf muscles, into really slow tempo, which can be about 6 seconds up and 6 seconds down. The main reason is I like to limit reps to significantly less than 10. And it can be, calf muscles are super strong muscles. So people are often, pumping out 15 reps, and it's just in this awkward area of, you'll get really tired and you'll get this hangover fatigue for days afterwards. Whereas if we can get tired quickly, maybe 6 to 8 reps, then you are tired for within 24 hours, and then you should feel as you did previously. And a simple way to achieve that can be slow strength. But it also teaches your muscles to fatigue within a different part of the range all the time. You're not only good at going up and then back down again, up and down, you're good at going from there to there to there. You're teaching your muscles to control the contraction at each part of your range, which is really important. So then plyo is the opposite. Plyo, we either go for maximum height or minimum contact. So you're trying to make it a really rapid rebound from the ground, or you're trying to go as high as you can, as explosive as you can. And I try to make that really clear when we're doing plyo. It's, I think it's particularly good to ward off things like cramps, because it's so good for your muscular coordination. So if people do suffer from cramps, I think that it's something that they should explore a little bit more. Super slow strength and then super dynamic plyo. It's a really good way to improve the coordination of our muscles. But it is something that you will only get out of plyo what you have currently in your strength foundation. So if you're still relatively new to strength, we'd like you to build your foundation first, and then you capitalize on it with your plyo. It doesn't necessarily improve your strength. It better coordinates the strength that you have. That's right. And I'll typically use plyo for probably 6 to 8 weeks. And then we get back into, that's probably building to an event and then getting back into strength. So into more heavy strength. So if they were doing the undulating 2 strength sessions 1 week and then 1 the following, the week where they're doing 2 sessions, one of those would be plyo. So it also helps to manage fatigue, because you don't get the same kind of fatigue if you're doing plyo exercises, which is why I think some people like it as their main form of strength. But I don't think long-term you'll get the same benefits as balancing that with some heavy strength as well. And it's also, there's a lot of impact forces, which is what we want from plyo. That's what we aim for. Our goal is to look at 10 times body weight of force, which is, that's they're big numbers. You're not going to be squatting 10 times body weight. So we need to know that your tissues are conditioned for what we're asking of them. And that's based on your strength program. If we know how much running you're doing and then the exercise you're doing, we know what you can tolerate. And it follows, quite clear progression, just to make sure that the plyo exercises will only be good for you.
That's cool. Thank you, Campbell.
There was a second part talking about functional exercises.
Yeah.
So always a compromise between doing exercises that replicate the activity and strength. I think a lot of the time, if you're doing only exclusively body weight exercises, I often tell people that depending on what else they're doing, they might be better off simply going for a run. So when you run, every time you land, it's 2.2-ish times body weight. So that's a lot of force. Whereas if you're just going to be doing, a few bridges on the floor, a few body weight squats, things like this, it might be good for other reasons. It could be good for mobility, improving your hip flexion through range if you're doing body weight squats. If you've got other goals, then I understand. But I'd prefer people wouldn't be devoting time thinking they're doing strength if they're doing some body weight exercises when they would get more benefit from simply running. So the function that we look at is what we're asking of the muscles. So the good example would be a calf muscle, which what happens when we run is the calf muscle doesn't necessarily stretch and then recoil. The calf muscle almost works statically, like an isometric, a static contraction, and that allows a nice foundation for the Achilles tendon to lengthen and then recoil. And it's really wonderful because that's almost free energy. I think 93% of the energy of the tendon is returned. So you're not consuming energy because the more you burn and the more you need to refuel and the more tired you're going to get more quickly. So the calf muscle is really quite amazing. It's essentially an isometric, a static contraction of your muscles while the tendon is able to lengthen and then return. So difficult to do either in the gym or in other ways to have an isometric contraction for your calf muscle while the tendon is doing its thing. So the function there is trying to make sure that our calf muscle is as strong as it can be in all these different positions, and then making sure we're looking after the Achilles tendon as well. We don't want to have an imbalance between the strength of our calf muscle and the strength of our tendon. So functionally, we're looking at how we can allow our calf to tolerate the huge forces that we expect of them. And the forces are really significant for downhill sprinting, which is, something that is often short-lived. But our calf muscles, we're asking about 8 times body weight for every time you land on your calf. And there's some really long, on the UTA, like huge 5K downhill that you can open up, that you might suffer the consequences later on. But we want to make sure that we can tolerate huge forces through our calves all of the time. And that's the kind of the function that we're aiming for.
Yeah, occasionally I seem to be dropping my audio for some reason. So if it comes to it, it should be working at the moment. I'll get you to paraphrase my question into your response, but I think we're probably all okay. I had a quick question actually about the calf muscles in regards to, I've heard the difference between the function of the gastroc and soleus in the calf and its relevance to running, and how to potentially isolate those and the relevance of that sort of thing. So possibly breaking down the calf muscle. And then my second part of that question is, how on earth are you getting to 6 to 8 reps? To fail on a calf muscle requires a significant amount of loading. How are we getting that load into someone? Calf muscles, as you said, are incredibly strong.
Yeah, they are. So I think what's important is what happens when people are doing higher reps is they don't realize that their range has reduced as you get tired. So it's really important to emphasize full range with good technique. So because otherwise you start off doing these beautiful full range calf raises, and then after 2 or 3 reps, people are kind of in that awkward middle ground, and then there's not much movement happening at all, but they want to get their reps up. So I like to do calf raises in just about any different position, preferably heavy, which often means a leg press machine if you are in a gym, using a squat rack at home, or holding on to some heavy weights at home as well. And you can use whatever you have available. There's camping water cylinders, you can get 20 liters, which is as many kilos, I've found out. So really quite straightforward. They've got a handle on them, so really convenient. But that's pretty simple. And if you want, you can get a backpack and throw some builder's sand in it as well. You can easily get an extra 20, 30 kilos to then put through one leg. Whereas if you've got a squat rack, purely for time, I often do bilateral. So 2 legs at the same time, just because doing 3 or 4 sets of 6 to 8 slow reps on your calves can take quite a long time, and time is precious. So if you want to limit yourself, I think always starting off with 2 legs, and then you feel what your full range is, and then you swap onto that 1 leg, and you're trying to reach that full range every single rep. And when you don't, either you've drifted off and you're listening to a podcast or something like that, and you can try again. And if you can achieve full range, fantastic, keep going. But if you can't, then job done. Moving on to the other leg, and then you can come back to it for the next set. So I think people probably spend more time working into that mid-range than I would necessarily like them to. And going slowly, 6 seconds is an incredibly long time. It's if you're counting 6 bananas, then it is a long time. That's on the way up and then again on the way down. So simple ways to target those muscles. When we're talking about the difference between gastrocs and soleus or soleus, depending on where you're from, gastrocs are the big ones you see on the top of people's calves, the ones that are really pronounced, that bodybuilders are very proud of. And then the soleus is the powerhouse. So that's the one that we really put a lot of stress through with running. So simply gastrocs, you use and you strengthen with more of a straight leg. And then when you get to about 90 degrees of bend in your knee, you're exclusively soleus. So no help from gastrocs. There's a lot of postures you get into with running where you've got a significant bend in your knee. If you were to choose, if you were only ever going to target one muscle group, I'd be looking at soleus for running. But really, when you're doing a straight leg calf raise, you will be using both. What I typically do is I split the difference and I go with more of a soft knee, because then you're also getting a nice static contraction at your knee, and that's the angle that you'll be spending a lot of time in running as well. So that's a little bit of function, but really it's just, I'm not going to be doing 3 or 4 sets with a super bent knee and 3 or 4 sets with a straight leg. It is just never going to happen, and I wouldn't ask that of anyone else either. So if you have what I call a soft knee, which is about like 10 degrees, 15 degrees, which if you're at the bottom of a bike pedal, if you're on the bike, when your leg is at the bottom, it's roughly the same angle that you would expect to have there. And being able to hold that position is really good too, because the other thing that happens when you fatigue with calf raises is people start doing squats without realizing it too. So if you notice you're changing the angle in your knee, that's another reminder that you might be tired and it's time to move on to another exercise.
So is it not to like complete fail, Campbell?
There's a lot of different research about working to failure.
Yeah.
And we don't need to. So I think if you can peg that back 1 or 2 reps, you will get all of the strength benefits and you'll recover faster. And yeah, you'll feel probably a whole lot better the following day.
Spoken like a man who's never been trapped under an Olympic weight bar on a bench before.
Look, at the same time, you might not know what you're capable of if you don't go to failure with every single exercise. So it's often good to know.
No, there's that old adage that you've got more than you think you have to give, so you've got 100% to give, but you've kind of got 120 or 130% to give. So, to fail kind of sneaks up on you sometimes, and you find yourself trapped on your bench calling for help from the gym.
Funny.
Well, I was telling Kerry that we need to get him one of those geriatric panic alarms, and then he can train to failure every single time.
Yes.
Absolutely. He does need that.
Speaking of geriatric, actually, quick question. I was reading some research that muscle atrophy over time for age is something in the vicinity of 5% per year. But of course, that's not 5% of total, so that in 20 years it's completely gone. It's cumulatively 5% each year, resetting at 100. So there is an atrophy effect of muscle over time as we age.
Sure.
How important is that to distance runners?
There's a really cool visual. I could probably find it if you like. I use it all the time. Our key demographic where I work now is probably over 75. So making sure that people are looking after themselves as best as possible. just as I'm working in a hospital setting, in a community setting, I use this. Would you like me to pull it up? It shouldn't take long.
Have a dig. There's a vote on whether it's Soleus or Soleus in the chat, so they will busy themselves with that whilst you have a dig around.
Yeah, look, I'm curious as well. I'd like to be educated about that because I use both interchangeably.
Yeah, I think Soleus sounds more exotic. Just Soleil. It's a small principality near Mexico, and yeah.
Well done filling in some time. So I've got the MRI up. How do I go about showing it?
There's a percent button at the bottom of your screen.
It's a rectangle with an arrow in it.
I can see it. Great. Simple. Have you got me?
I believe so.
Starting.
Has that shared? Oh.
Can you see what I can see?
We've got screenception, infinity mirror.
Oh, I do. Wait a second. How do we? It's done your video.
Hey, there we go.
Is it up? Can you see the MRIs?
Okay.
You can. Is it full screen for you?
It's not
It is,
full
yeah.
screen. It's yeah, that's better. Zoomed in. Well, I can see them all. They're just further apart.
How about that? Right? Is that any good? Or I can always flick it your way, and then you could share.
Maybe actually unzoom, because then you can see all three. Yeah.
Great.
Are we on? Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry, the live feed is just taking a little bit longer than.
I've done it. Oh, I did it. Okay, I need to find the pin button. Okay, I found it too. Okay, good. That should work for everyone. Sorry, excuse me whilst the live screen catches up with that. I did have it. We lost it. Campbell, can you present again?
Oh, it's back. All right.
I did have it. I just needed to hit a pin button. So it presents it as a separate, as though you're an attendee joining. Can you share it again? There, great. There we go. Great, thank you.
How's that?
That's big and proud. That's how we want it.
Cool. So we have, this is an MRI of thigh muscle, so of quad. So you've got the top image is a 40-year-old triathlete. So you've got the thigh bone running through here, the nice white bit, and then a lot of muscle, just a little bit of fat, being a triathlete. And then the 74-year-old sedentary man is this middle one, which is a little bit like Wagyu beef. So there's not a whole lot of muscle, but a whole lot of fat. And then down the bottom here, we have a 70-year-old triathlete. So I would argue that the bottom image is probably even better than the top one. They have less body fat. They've got plenty of muscle. They just look strong and healthy. So I really like that image. I think it's really great. So that would be, when we're talking about older athletes and the importance of maintaining muscle, it really is how they can support their training with appropriate rest, recovery, nutrition, sleep, everything else. You probably just need to be a little bit more mindful of your recovery as opposed to as heavily focused on the training parameters. But I think that anyone who is feeling a little bit older than they were a few years ago can relate to that quite easily. But I think it's really quite a powerful message just to focus on, probably being even more mindful of making sure that you're supporting your system with enough of all your macros, having good food advice on board, avoiding overtraining or training like you did 20 or 30 years previously. So just making sure you can, try and maintain as much muscle balance in your training as possible, being as focused on recovery as you can be.
Cool. All right. So there's a few questions that kind of go together. What's the ideal balance between running and strength work? Do you have any advice for the timing of the exercise during the week? And then also dealing with DOMs and then using it as an excuse to but avoid doing strength work because it impacts running?
Yeah, DOMS it's not unavoidable. I think if you stop a couple of reps before failure, you will pull up much better. But it's not something that you need to expect with every single training session in the gym. So any new exercises, I would expect you to experience some soreness, and it's typically 24 hours afterwards. And it's the same as if you go for a run on the hills and you haven't been on the hills for a little while. You can pretty much, I can set my alarm for 24 hours later. It's going to catch up with me. But I found that if you sneak in your second run the next day, 2 hours before that 24-hour window, then you're okay. You might even get home before the DOMS start. So the worst are DOMS is delayed onset muscle soreness for everyone playing at home. The worst are the ROMs, when you haven't finished your run, you haven't got muscle soreness, and it starts developing. You're like, I'm really unconditioned. I'm not ready for whatever I'm doing at the moment because it's only been, maybe it's been an hour or 90 minutes and you're already sore. So ROMs are what you really want to look out for.
Yeah, I've had that before. Yeah. You wonder how the hell you're going to get back up that hill.
You really want to get home, but you also don't want to stop. So yeah, it's a conundrum.
The long downhill sessions, the eccentric downhill sessions that I'll do every now and again, done right, obviously, and safely to avoid injury, I can load up my quads, and then I think even after the downhill rep, realizing that I've got a few Ks to get back, and I may not make it.
Yeah, you're running a little bit like Tim at the Frog. The communication between brain and muscles is not quite the same as it was at the start of your run. Yeah, it does happen. I think those downhill reps, and you might go out with best intentions of doing a certain number, maybe it's 7, and then after you've done 2, you think 3 is the perfect number now. 3 is wonderful. 3 means that tomorrow I've got a chance of actually doing something fun. So yeah, DOMS does happen, and it's not through poor management. I think it's with anything that's new. I think understanding and appreciating that is really important. Fatigue is something that I would expect people to experience almost ongoing with strength. If you're doing heavy strength in particular, I would expect you to have fatigue. If you do strength in the morning, then later that day and into the following morning. So around programming, I would avoid the quality sessions, which would specifically be intervals and tempo. Anything where you're trying to achieve a target of time, I would avoid strength before those sessions. I would strive for strength before things like a long run or a fast finish long run, something where you want to experience a little bit of suffering. I think it kind of throws a good 5 or 10 Ks in your legs before you start your run. And the whole point is to experience fatigue and see what happens to your body, your posture, your everything, as you are out there for quite a long period of time. So if you can carry over a little bit of fatigue, pre-fatigue from your strength session, either the night before or the day before, then I think you'll benefit from it. It's not going to be fun. I wouldn't do it every time, but I think it's a good learning experience, which those long runs are all about. The ways you can avoid excessive fatigue are really simple. So one is Plyo. We use Plyo as a way to keep people maintain their strength and convert their current strength into power, but also avoid excessive fatigue during a high training block. The other simple things you can do are to stop 2 reps before you normally do. So if you are already stopping 2 reps before failure, you're now stopping 4 reps before failure, and you drop an entire set. So if you were doing 4 sets, you're now doing 3. If you were doing 3, you're now doing 2. You will not lose any strength. You will still improve your strength if you're doing it with good technique and nice and slowly, or however it's structured, but you won't get the same fatigue. People get a little disappointed because you get it's what you expect your body to feel like after a strength session, to have that fatigue in your legs the following day, and to be wearing your compression tights underneath your work pants, which for most of us are still soft pants and have been for quite a long period of time, but to focus so heavily on the recovery because of everything else they're doing. But people get a bit disappointed that they don't have that fatigue hangover the following day. But it's absolutely fine. It's a really simple thing that we can do to avoid fatigue if you just want to focus more on the running at that stage.
Cool, that's helpful. I think we've got those questions covered. So I feel like, let's have a look. I'm just trying to make sure that these questions are covered.
While
So
she has a look through those questions, Campbell, I might just tidy up. Did you want me to put an item in the Squadron shop so that people can book a trial with you and then we pass them through, or would you prefer that athletes are going to go directly to runstrong.co? How would you prefer to operate that?
Yeah, I think either way. So we discussed a week or so ago about having a trial offer of, at $10, and people can do 3 months, any programs. The same deal as if you're on a subscription, but just to get people going. So
yeah,
I can send you guys the code, and then people can use that at checkout. We'll just make it something like SQUADRUN 2021, something really complicated. But yeah, hopefully people can just plug in the code. So you go into runstrong.co, you look for either a subscription or a particular program that you like, and then when you're at checkout, you plug this code in, and then anything that you want would just be $10, and you can have access for 3 months. And that includes just the normal stuff, which is making changes. If you don't have the main changes, one of the exercises might use an exercise ball, and I think it's a really good bit of equipment. You can do a lot with it, and if someone doesn't have that, then I can put in something else. So same exercise using a different piece of equipment. The other stuff that I think is really valuable that people probably don't do as much as I would like to is the self-assessment. So I've got a template with videos of all the different tests for calf, hammies, quads, glutes, groin, and I would probably give it a couple of weeks of doing a program and then do the strength test, just because otherwise your numbers will probably improve significantly because you're better at doing the exercises as opposed to necessarily showing a change in strength. So if you do a couple of weeks of a strength program and then you test, and then you do it again a couple of months later, then hopefully that's a better measure of comparison. And they would take maybe half an hour to do at home if you're doing the longer one, and the shorter one is about 10 minutes. You get some really valuable info for yourself. You get to see things that you might not be aware of. That a lot of us have an imbalance left versus right in different muscle groups, and it's not necessarily that lefty is always the weaker side, or it could be righty, it could be different muscle groups, quads on one side, hammies, glutes on the other. I find it all very interesting, but I think people get a lot of value from that as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. I think, as you speak, I think there's a lot of people in the back of their minds are like, I totally want to get into it, like straight away. Like, what do I do? I need to do this thing. How can I start doing leg raises in my chair? They're all, yeah, this is the usual story. Get it, Ali? Did you get it?
I don't think I did.
I thought you were starting a Viking clap.
I could.
We've had a couple of questions.
Great.
A couple of questions about poles, actually, Campbell. There's quite a bit of use of it in, obviously, really long ultras and also mountainous ultras. So is it something that you're familiar with, and how do we bring that into training as well?
Yeah, I use poles, especially on the hills, the long hills. Like we discussed earlier with the glutes, as a way to offload your quads, even by a small amount, is helpful in the long run. And likewise, poles do the same. So I've learned a lot from you, Kerry, about using poles on UTA camp. That was really fantastic doing that education session, that training session. But what I understand is that you end up using more energy because you're obviously committing other muscles to the run as well, but it does offload your quads quite significantly, 20 to 30%, which is huge if you're using them well. And that's probably the catch. Whereas I think a lot of people will borrow them for an event and turn up on the day and expect just to have this, magically fresh quads come halfway. But it doesn't really work like that. There is a lot of skill involved, which does take practice. I'm fortunate to have a training buddy, and she only likes poles on the descending, whereas I'm probably more reckless than she is on the descent, and she's a lot more powerful than me on the climbs. So she uses the poles on the way down, and I use them on the way up. And yeah, while she's pulling away from me on the climbs, she doesn't have to listen to me talk about strength training for runners. But on the way down, she's all mine.
Yeah, I think there's a separate session here entirely. I think probably at some stage, Ali, you and I should turn the microphone into our lounge and get the poles out and perhaps help athletes do some of the technical poles and pole use type training as well.
There were some really simple tips that you guys did at the UTA camp that was just so good. So and you could see then also, because what's that 5K descent that you do?
Kadamba.
Yeah, and people were using them then, and they were playing with the poles on the way down, then up the other side. Like that was so good. So just the confidence that you get, and like I said, I've been using poles, but yeah, picked up some great top tips from you on that day. It was good.
Yeah, they're cheat sticks definitely. Once if you have mastered them in some regard, they definitely can help you if you know how to use them. But yeah, if you're not ready for doing handbrake turns in your sports car, it's probably not time to reach for the handbrake on race day. So. One of the interesting things I stumbled across before we were chatting tonight is I was looking at some of the research on training, and there was a really good meta that I found from 2013, obviously still relevant, that a meta of some 25 trials. I think they had something like 25,000 participants looking at injuries and prevention. And one of the quotes that I took from it was, despite a few outlying studies, consistently favorable estimates were obtained for all injury prevention measures except stretching. Strength training reduced sports injuries to less than 1/3, and overuse injuries could be almost halved.
Yep, pretty powerful stuff. It's yeah, stretching is a bit of a funny one. I think I think when that study came out, that was the final excuse I'd be looking for to never stretch again. And I really wholeheartedly embraced that. But I think it's one of those things, like with any repetitive sport, which, for us, we're talking running and cycling or swimming, where you're working through the same range for thousands of revolutions or repetitions on end. And if you spend, 10 plus hours each week running in that slight hip flexion position, then you might, for me, I've got a bit of a commute in the car, so sitting in the car. If I neglect to look after, the whole anterior chain and just let that tighten up as it wants to, my entire range will be reduced quite quickly. So, I wouldn't spend a lot of time stretching. But I'll probably be more aware if I'm starting to feel tight in a particular area, and then I'll spend some time on it. So if I'm getting achy in the front of my hips, then I will know that I need to address that with a simple stretch. And likewise, if getting tight in your calves, that's something you really want to avoid, because you want to make sure that they're moving as well as they can. And I might jump on the roller, but I certainly don't have a structured stretching routine that I would follow at any time. I do like foam rollers. I really like those massage balls, the old little lacrosse balls or sparky balls, tennis balls. There's so many different things out there. Really is a way to check in on your body, and just if you feel that anything is suspiciously uncomfortable, then you probably need to address that before it becomes an issue. But yeah, I wouldn't do stretching routinely. I do add mobility into programs mainly because people expect it, but we also want to maintain good, healthy movement through, the middle of our backs. You're not running like a robot, as I'm probably prone to do because I don't do any stretching. We want to make sure that you have ample movement through all of our favorite joints without just, turning into the Tin Man.
So I feel like you've snuck into the YouTube stream, Campbell, and seen the questions coming in, because one of the questions was, do you recommend much of a warm-up / mobility work before the 20-minute sessions you were mentioning earlier? And then somebody else has said, I've wondered that before, and I've often felt the need to do 20 minutes of cardio before strength work. So what are your thoughts around those things?
Well, I used to if I was to ride my bike to work, there was a gym at work. So it was about a 15-minute bike ride. So then, you know, I would normally, just because I was probably a little bit more lazy in the gym and looking at filling in time, I'd jump on the roller first of all. But if everything felt fine, then I'm not going to be doing any mobility stuff because it's on my program. If I feel good, and I think rollers are really good, same as the, you know, spiky balls and whatever else people use, they're a really good way to check in on yourself. If you feel terrible, then you need to commit some time to, you know, relaxing, whatever that looks like for you. If that's either, if you would prefer to pay someone to spend an hour rubbing your legs, which, you know, it's sometimes the easiest thing to do because you book it in and it's an appointment and then off you go, as opposed to you being diligent yourself to spend a bit of time on the roller each night for a couple of weeks. But if you do notice that you're feeling tighter than you otherwise would, then you do need to address that to make sure that you still feel at your best. I do add a 5-minute mobility routine at the start of each workout, and they typically have 3 exercises, but they are called, I think in the notes it says, please set your timer for 5 minutes. So I just ask people to get their phone and set it for 5 minutes, and they're not going to then spend 20 minutes looking at an Instagram feed and there's the whole session gone because they were just, you know, rolling around on the floor, doing a few stretches. So I don't think that it's as essential as maybe getting into your first set of exercises and making sure you start off with a lighter weight. You don't go straight into your PB on that first round of exercises. So the way that I would ideally structure it, say it's a squat because it's something that people can relate to. You might have 30 kilos to start off with as your first set. And then your second set might go up to, say, 50. And then if you're doing 4 sets, you might do another one at 50. And then if you're already getting tired, you might drop that back down to 40. That's just numbers as an example. But I wouldn't expect every set to have the same weight in it, because the first one we're kind of warming up, and that's what I would consider to be our warm-up. And that's the same with all exercises. And then once you're warm, then you can really apply yourself to the second and the third set. And then you should be getting a little tired by the time you get to the 4th set. So it's okay if the weight comes off, because we're trying to hit those numbers of maybe 6 or 8 reps, which I think is more important than the amount of weight people are throwing around.
Oh, that's really helpful. And then there was a question which I thought was interesting. For newbie pole users, what strength work do you recommend?
I wouldn't necessarily be adding in any like upper body lats or any specific upper body exercises. If you don't have a lot of upper body strength, then that would be a consideration. If you don't have a lot of core strength, then, you know, you're really trying to transfer your upper body muscles into your legs, and that's going to happen through your core. So if you don't have a lot of strength in these areas, then it is a consideration.
There's a question from the chat, Campbell. I'll read it to you. The question, name withheld. My legs are like twisted steel, but I have flappy Kermit arms. I'm Arnie from the waist down, but look wasted from the waist up. My girlfriend laughs at me. What should I do? You
have to keep training for failure on the bench press, obviously.
What?
So,
the name was withheld. What are you on about? This could be from anybody. Savage.
Yeah.
I think final probably question, unless there's anything else that comes in. I feel like this has been answered, but it would be good to hear your thoughts about it. So they've said, I have a question around scheduling weight training and running. When weight training like legs makes them tired and then very heavy and slow to run on, which gets priority, run frequency or weight training?
Well, I really like the way that SQUADRUN, you guys, you program your priorities. So you've got a few, you know, your P1 runs, you've got some runs that are non-negotiable, and there's some other ones you might be able to move around depending on what else is coming up. So I would be looking at having the strength, avoiding those priority runs and scheduling in your strength when you can. but making sure you do schedule it in, because if you think, oh, I'll just do it later in the week, it will be, probably Sunday night. And if you've already been on a long run and then you've got to do something else on Monday morning, you're not going to enjoy it as much as you otherwise would. So it is important to schedule it in. Preferably, if you're doing 2 sessions a week, I wouldn't do them on consecutive days. I don't think that will be beneficial or enjoyable. If you've got a wide open calendar, then I would be, ideally doing it with 2 days of non-strength in between. But it really depends on how life is looking for you that week and how you can really manage to fit it all in. When you're in the routine, it's really easy, like everything. When it's an established habit, you're away. But it's trying to figure out that awkward, probably first 3 or 4 weeks when you're figuring out what that routine looks like for you. And that's typically when people might drop off just because it's too hard. So if it is getting hard, go to once a week and you will get a lot of benefits from it.
Good idea. I like it. Hear anything else?
No, I was just having a play on the Run Strong site. It's very straightforward. Go there, have a look, have a scroll through. There are training programs for events. Obviously, a lot of them have a Australian focus, but the relevance basically is that for any of our hard, hilly, technical ultras in New Zealand, of which there are obviously many, I would probably be leaning towards something like the UTA training program. There are options there for training at home or training in the gym. There are more advanced options like Plyo sessions, but probably start easy with the intro, phase 1 plans on there. So if you are headed for a Ring of Fire or obviously Ultra Trail Australia or any of those sorts of things, have a look at those plans. As I said, Campbell will give us a discount code for you to enter when you look at purchasing one of those. Tutterware Ultra, pretty straightforward. Anything that's got a little bit of sand running. We've got Surfco Century and in some regard Margaret River Ultra, which are relatively similar, I would imagine, Campbell.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they. I do remember I tweaked a couple of things, but I honestly couldn't tell you what they were. But I think because I lived in Margaret River for a while, so I really wanted to have a specific training program for that one too. It's very near and dear to my heart. So it's a beautiful part of the world.
Oh yeah, Mark's
stunning.
Amazing. Yeah, 5K.
Did you see that new event that they're putting on? What is it? The Great Southern Endurance.
Yeah, is that 200 miles or something ridiculous?
Over several days.
Is it 200K?
It's 3 days of running, so it's a multi-day stage run, and you could race it if you really wanted. I'm sure there's always 1 or 2 people that are taking it very seriously, but it looks very much like an excellent hosted running holiday to me. So I think at least that's how I'm going to explain it to the accountant.
Some research.
There was one question which I thought would probably be really interesting to answer before we finish up. And it was doing strength work on rest days or keeping rest days just for rest?
I think this is really individual. So 2 types of people that I would typically see. I love my rest day. Like I program my rest days first and foremost. And then outside of that, I try to fit everything else in. So I would triple stack a day just to make sure that I had a rest day, just because I really enjoy having that rest day. Whereas other people, they're the more metronomes. They need to have something on each day. And it's how they function. It's how they can, function best at work, at home, and everything else in their life. So it's, I wouldn't talk people into going one way or the other. If you need to keep your strength going by putting it in on a rest day, just so you can keep that structure, that daily routine, then that's absolutely fine. I think that it has to be individual to suit people's needs. It is certainly different to the impact of running. So it's going to have a different stress on your body. And I have tried with an elite runner before of using strength to aid recovery, although this is probably more along Kerry's strength of doing bench press, because we were trying to elicit a testosterone response in a female elite marathon runner. So we were doing some super heavy for her, and her arms, I'm sure, could rival yours, Kerry. She has T-Rex arms if I've ever seen them, but she's a very gifted runner, so she doesn't need guns. So a maximum bench for her was not heavy. Pull-ups were very cute too. And we're trying to bring about testosterone response to aid with recovery from the huge volume she was doing, 160K weeks, and a lot of it was, all of it was high quality. I did see if I could run 1 kilometer as fast as she can maintain for a marathon. And I found this hill that I was just bombing on, and I could just sneak under for 1K as fast as she can run a marathon. So, yeah, so very, very talented. It didn't take much to fatigue her upper body. But I wouldn't say that running strength is going to help with recovery for your legs. It's it's something that we need to consider for each individual, how they structure that best.
Brilliant. I didn't realize that there was that hack, but it does explain why I'm literally oozing testosterone. Literally. Brilliant. Okay, well, we won't take up too much of your time. I greatly appreciate you committing an hour and a bit of your time to on a Sunday afternoon, and it got eerily quiet in your house, which means there's probably a small child outside somewhere. You probably need to
roaming.
Yeah, chase that one down. Free-range children, which is how we love it. Thank you again for your time. I will close up our live stream and our session and remind our athletes in our Facebook groups how to get in touch with you and have a look at doing some strength training with you. As always, I appreciate your time, Campbell. Thanks so much.
Thank you both.
See ya.
Thanks. I've just